Alright, so now let's continue. So now that we have checked the required fields, we have checked the types of the values. Now we just need to check the values of the actual values of these fields. So let's do that. And for it, let's again create another function which we can name as verify field values. So within this function, we again need to have the incoming data, this variable. So let's copy it as well. Now over here, we just need to check the values. But before that, make sure, just like the required fields, as we commented these two things, because we don't really want to construct or to create the data again and again for each test. So we are just returning true within this function. In the same way, within the verify field types, we will be doing the same thing. Let's return back true, just so that we don't have to pass in all the fields. So now let's work on the validation. So starting with the created at, as we are checking the type of it to be a timestamp. The other thing that we need to check is that it is supposed to be the current time, the time when the request was made. So for that, we can again use the same request.time variable which we have over here in order to check that thing, whether the created at field, the value of it is equals to this thing, which means the current time. So for that, over here within the incoming data, we have the created at. We just need to double equals to this thing, the request.time, in such a way. Although this is what we need to do, but we won't be doing it just for the while we are testing the different fields, because while building up a document, if we select the timestamp type for the field, there is no option of selecting the current time. So we won't be actually able to test this thing just by using the simulator. So that's kind of a limitation. So instead, we can just do less than or greater than, which means that the created at should be a time in the past. So now let's call this function along with the others. Now it's also possible to have a single function, which I think should be the case because we won't be using these functions. So never mind, I think it's way cleaner to separate the logic into different functions. So let's keep it the way that it is. So now if we try to create a document, let's pass in the created at, a timestamp, and first let's select a time in the future just to check whether it's denying the request. If we do that, so that's perfect. But the other thing to check is that it should be because of this thing, as that's the point. So over here, I think this is the check, this thing. 1 second. This thing, wait a second, yep. So this should be false, and that's what it is. So that's perfect. Now let's try the same thing when the time is in the past, as that's what we are checking right now. If we do this thing, it should be allowed. So that is great. That's one thing off the list. So now let's continue with the long URL thing. This thing, we will be addressing this in the end, because this is something where I faced a roadblock, and I will be getting back to this in the end. For now, let's work on the name one. So for the name field, we have to check the same things that we are doing in the front end, which is that it has to be minimum 3 and maximum 15 characters. So for this, it's a pretty old system, so it's lagging a bit. So for this, we again need to use the size method that we used within the shortcode right over here. So as the name is a string, we can use the size method. Let's do that. So incoming data dot the name, calling the size method, which will give us the number of characters. This thing should be more than or equals to 3 because it's minimum. So it can be either 3 or more than 3, and at the same time adding in the double ampersand. In the same way, it should be less than or equals to 15 as such. Now the other thing is, as we do not really want to pass the time as well, just to test it out using the simulator. So for the time being, the way around is to just comment the one that we don't really want to check and add in the return in such a way. So now if we do this thing, we just need to pass in the name. Let's pass it over here, 1 2, which let's actually set it something like this, 2 characters. So this thing should fail, should be denied. That's what it is. Perfect. And the reason should be that it is not more than or equals to 3, and that's what it is. Perfect. So now let's try with the 3 characters in such a way. Well, actually it's much easier, or to say it's much it's actually easy to do to write in the rules and test it out using the local simulator. But I think I will be covering that in a different project. For now, let's just stick with this thing. So as you can see, the request is allowed, which is perfect. Okay, so as you can see, the request is allowed, but if it is more than 15 characters, it should be denied. And the reason should be that this thing should be true because it is more than 3, but this thing should be false because it is more than 15, which should not be the case. So that's perfect. That's 2 things off the list. So as you're writing the rules, you will be more confident in how you can ensure that everything is exactly how it is supposed to be. So now let's continue with the shortcode. So for this, we kind of need to do the same thing. We need to check the length of the string, and it has to be equals to 6, as that's what we are testing over here on the links collection. So in the same way, let's pass in return incoming data dot the shortcode, the size of it, and it has to equals to 6 in such a way. So now if we do this thing, well, we don't really have to kind of test the obvious, but let's see. It should be true. Perfect. However, if it is not equals to 6, then this thing should be denied. Perfect. And we can see the check right over here. It should be false, and that's what it is. Perfect. So that's, I guess, 3 things off the list. Let's work on the total clicks. So this thing is pretty interesting. So as you know, you should know that the security rules, they can just check the data. Like, they do not have the power to modify the data which is being written or which is about to get written. You cannot change, you cannot modify the data. However, you can check that it is in the way that, how it is supposed to be. So for that, as the total clicks, it's something which should be 0. It is a default value. So as we cannot pass that thing just by the security rules, so we have structured it in such a way that the total clicks is being passed down from the user's end. But by using the security rules, we can check that it should be 0, at the time of creation. So that's what we need to check within the incoming data, the total clicks. It has to be 0 as such. And if we test it out, number, and it has to be 1. If we do that thing, it will be denied as this thing is not equals to 0. However, if we do pass in the value of 0, then it should be allowed. Let's see. So that's perfect. So now let's get to the long URL, this thing. So the thing is, we cannot use the same regular expression. Like, it is possible to use regular expression. 1 second. So for the long URL, we are using a regular expression in the web application. We cannot do the same thing, like completely the same thing in the security rules, because I got to know that 1 second. Data types, I think it's much easier to explain with the example. So this thing, the string type, so on the string we have a method, a function which is matches this thing. So it takes a regular expression, which is a good thing, but the catch is that we cannot pass in a regular expression, the one that we use in the web application, because it has to follow the Google RE2 syntax, and that's the reason why we cannot really use the same thing. It won't work. So what instead we can do is, I actually searched for it, which is Firebase regular expressions, something like this, and I saw on this page, if we scroll at the very bottom, we will be finding we are going to find a regular expression which checks a basic URL, and this regular expression, it is it's in RE2 syntax, which is acceptable by the security rules. So over here you can do the same thing. You can first Google the Firebase regular expression. The very first link should bring you to this page, and if you scroll at the very bottom, you're gonna find this regular expression which we can use. So let's copy it from the matches, this thing. Let me just zoom in as well. Actually, that's too close. And over here, let's first comment this thing out. And over here, within the incoming data, we need to check the long URL as such. So as we know that this is a string, and because it is, we can use the matches method on it, and we can pass in the regular expression in such a way. The other thing is, I guess it has to be in a string, like we have to wrap it inside of quotes in the same way. And now let me just save it in order to see whether it's formatted or not. Well, it is, so that's great. So now if we try passing in the long URL, this thing should be allowed as it is a long URL, but it is not. I think it's okay, so this thing is turning out to be false. Actually, I wrote the rules for reference. Let me just see, where is it? Seems, oh, okay. Maybe if we remove this thing, I'm not quite sure what is the reason. Well, this was the roadblock that I was referring to earlier. Okay, so it is working. I think we have to remove the, well, this should not be the case. Let me just try with a different value, something which is not a URL, and it's denying. Well, I'm not quite sure whether it's for the right reason. What if it's, well, we have to pass in the protocol. So what if it has space in between or special characters? Let's see. Okay, so it's being denied. Well, I'm still not quite sure whether this is the right thing, like this is the right regular expression that we should be using. The thing is, firstly, you can copy the same thing and you can remove the what's the front slash, the thing that we had earlier, this thing, from the starting and the ending, and we just need to wrap it inside of a string. If we do that, And if we test it out, let's check with not this thing, long URL has to be, how about not a TLD? Let's see if this thing works. Okay, so it's denying. I think it does work. Okay. Without this thing. Okay, so I think it does work. Okay, that's strange, but that's a good thing. Anyways, so I think that's the last check that we had to do. So yep, well actually it's a good thing that it is working. Alright, so now that we have checked all the 5 fields, we just need to chain them together. Let's do that. And we just need to remove the underline, sorry, the return from each statement other than the first one. So over here, let's remove all this thing, and in the end we just need to add in double ampersand except the last one, but we need to have a semicolon at the end, and let's uncomment the first one as well. So now let's actually try passing in all the fields in the right format just to check whether it's working. So the name, it has to be more than 3 or equals to 3 but less than or equals to 15, so this would be valid. Then for the short code, it has to be 6 characters. Then for the total clicks, it has to be a number of value 0. Then for the created art, this thing has to be a timestamp, a time in the past. Okay, let me just do it again. 6 characters. So these are 4 fields. Then we need to pass in the what is it? What am I missing? Short code. Hold up, name, created art, total clicks. Okay, the long URL. Okay, so there are 5 fields. I was kind of thinking there are 6. Okay, so we have to pass in the long URL, which should be a well formatted URL. Let's actually try a different thing. Won't make any difference anyway. So now that we are passing all the fields, the name is, it's right. The created art, it's a time in the past. Total clicks is supposed to be 0 and a number. The shortcode has to be of 6 characters. The long URL should be of well formatted URL. So if we try running this thing, it should be allowed, and that's what it is. So that is great, and we can check each of the things. Obviously the entire thing should be like it's returning true, which means all the conditions are being met. So that's great, and I think that's it for the create one. And again, my system is lagging because of this detailed information. Anyway, so now we just need to write the rules for the update when anyone is trying to update the link document, which will be interesting. So let's do that.